Hezbollah's deputy head, and he said that Hezbollah knows their duty and will take action when it is time. Now, how would you interpret this statement?
Well, the region is not going to sit idle as the Israeli regime massacres the Palestinians, as it tries to carry out ethnic cleansing in Gaza. It's not going to happen. The Americans want it to happen. The Europeans want it to happen. They have no problem with the genocide that we now see in Gaza. Make no mistake, the Western political elite support ethnic cleansing, and they support the genocide. The Western media, the mainstream media, the legacy media, the state-run media, they support what the Israeli regime is doing. They are just as guilty as the regime itself. But the people of the region and people across the global south, and I'm very sure many ordinary people in the West who see through the propaganda, will not tolerate this situation. So as things progress, the region is going to move towards greater confrontation. And unless the Israeli regime backs down soon, I think it's going to get into a much worse situation than we're witnessing today.
Iran has warned Israel to immediately halt its war crimes against Gaza or could face a huge earthquake of resistance. Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon kill a journalist and wound several others. State Department emails talk about no Gaza de-escalation talks. Iran's foreign minister warns Israel from Beirut it could suffer a huge backlash. And are Israel and its military acting within the laws of the international criminal courts in their war against Hamas in Gaza? The latest news today, and we got a lot to talk about because so much has happened in the last 24 hours. And it just seems that each passing hour, we have something that accelerates into something worse in the previous hour. And when you're dealing with a very unique situation like this, where there is a situation where an environment which is controlled by a government and its military is being subjected to attack, and meanwhile there are people within this enclave that have restricted movements, and the defense is that any one of these people could be an operative for Hamas. Any building can be a building for Hamas, and that's why a lot of people within the West, especially with the media, don't want to criticize Israel regarding this, but at the same time, they're ignoring what is happening currently, and that is war crimes, acts of genocide, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. In fact, and near the end of this video, we're going to talk about what those definitions are so you can make your judgments about whether Israel is committing specific war crimes or are they not. Now, let's get with the latest news in what's happening right now. And as you can see here, propaganda, deception, fake news in the Israel-Hamas conflict. We talked about this in the previous video, have we not? Hamas Authority for Refugees Affairs has called Israel already notorious directive that all civilians should evacuate the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Fake propaganda. Whoever wrote that is dead wrong and was certainly not involved in the planning of last week's armed incursion into Israel carried out by the Palestinians' grouped armed wing, the Qassam Brigades. The last thing that matters in any propaganda operation is whether there is any truth in it. Multiple surprise breaches of Israeli security barriers between it and Gaza were carried out in a very determined and efficient fashion, as were the executions and captures of members of Israelis' armed forces and civilians in a settlement swarmed by Hamas fighters. You know, the defense by Israel is that we don't know who Hamas is. That's why we are subjecting the Palestinians to this treatment. Well, on the same time, would it not be the same for the Palestinians or Hamas, that they capture or kill Israeli citizens because it's mandatory for every civilian in Israel to serve in the IDF, which is the same military that is subjecting the Palestinians to brutal treatment? I don't condone violent actions on civilians, but this is the defense that certain people are using when it comes to Israel. The main purpose of the attack was not military, except possibly to the limited degree of taking hostages who can be used as human shields in case of expected Israeli armed retaliation on the ground. The real purpose of the action was Hamas' desire to demonstrate what it is capable of militarily in terms of willingness to use extreme violence. Israel admits intelligence mistakes in failing to predict Hamas attack. A senior Israeli official acknowledged mistakes made in intelligence assessments ahead of the Hamas attacks last weekend, which took the country by surprise and killed more than 1,300 people. It's my mistake, and it reflects the mistakes of all those making intelligence assessments, National Security Advisor Tajachi Hanagbi told a press briefing. We really believe that Hamas learned a lesson from its last major war with Israel in 2021. Israel received no concrete warning, including from Egypt, of the Hamas 7th incursion. However, I read you the news article where Egypt said that they gave operational intelligence that there was going to be something big from Hamas soon. Like 9/11, the warnings were ignored, no stricter security measures were taken, and the only thing we're missing were specifics. Were they? Palestinians in Gaza struggle to follow Israeli evacuation order and face dire water shortage. Palestinians struggled Saturday to flee from areas of Gaza targeted by the Israeli military while grappling with a growing water and medical supply shortage ahead of an expected land offensive a week after Hamas' bloody, wide-ranging attack in Israel. Israel renewed calls on social media and in leaflets dropped from the air for Gaza residents to move south, while Hamas urged people to stay in their homes. See, Israel is hoping that Hamas is successful in this area because we can get rid of the Palestinian problem, as well as Hamas. In fact, everybody altogether. It would benefit the Israeli government to get rid of Hamas and the Palestinians, which is exactly what they're going to do anyway. They're getting rid of the Palestinians in Gaza City, in Khan Yunis, in Ramallah, and Hamas is being liquidated. So the area of Gaza Strip will come under total Israeli control, where there'll be no Palestinians living there. 1.1 million displaced, whether they'll go south or they'll be killed. They can't get out. The border crossing for Egypt is closed. To the north is the Gaza Strip, controlled by Israel. And every border surrounding Gaza is controlled by the Israeli military. Where do they go? Without water, running out of food, without electricity, without internet. The information is controlled by Israel totally. The entire situation is controlled by Israel totally. They control and conduct what is happening. And if they are committing war crimes, you won't know it because those victims of war crimes will be dead. The defense from Israel will be, well, they were Hamas, or Hamas affiliated, or supplying Hamas with goods and services, or the defense of collective punishment can come in. And we're going to talk about that later. The evacuation directive covers an area of 1.1 million residents, or about half the territory's population. The Israeli military said hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have heeded the warning and headed south. It gave Palestinians a 6-hour window that ended Saturday afternoon to travel safely within Gaza along 2 main routes. Now, earlier today, this morning, there was a broadcast about Palestinians leaving Gaza City. And there was this convoy of about 170 Palestinians on a truck told to leave. As they were leaving, they were bombed by Israeli aerial warplanes. As of this morning, right now, 75 people are dead. Over 150 wounded. A war crime. Ignored by the United States. I'm going to get to that next up and tell you how the United States are now complicit in covering up Israeli war crimes. Israeli attack in southern Lebanon kills journalists, wounds several others. I told you in previous videos, this is extending beyond the borders of Gaza, of Israel. Because the ultimate game, the ultimate goal is regional conflict with Iran and its allies, which by default are Lebanon and Syria. To destroy Hezbollah, they'll need the United States military. At least one journalist has been killed and 6 wounded. This is not the first time Israel military have killed journalists. There is a history, long history of this, including 2 Al Jazeera reporters. And shelling by Israeli forces in southern Lebanon, according to 2 witnesses at the scene. Reuters news agency confirmed on Friday that Issam Abdallah, videographer, was killed in the attack. We are urgently seeking more information, working with authorities in the region and supporting Issam's family and colleagues, Reuters said in a statement. 2 other Reuters journalists, Tahir al-Sudani and Mahir Naza, sustained injuries, according to the statement. Al Jazeera said camera person Eli Brakia and reporter Carmen Jukar were also wounded. The tank shell hit them directly. A tank shell on reporters. It was horrible. The situation over there was, I can't explain, I can't describe it. Al Jazeera correspondent Ali Hasham reported from Alma al-Sab in Lebanon, added that the team of reporters have been clearly marked as press. Here's al-Shaham's tweet, as you can see right here. While the war crimes are going on and the assassination of children and women and journalists happening even outside the borders, what is the United States response? Well, I'll tell you. And it's even far more horrifying than we previously imagined. Stunning State Department memo warns diplomats, no Gaza de-escalation talk. No Gaza de-escalation talk. What does that tell you? And is anybody surprised at the Biden administration's cowardice and lack of morality in this situation? Because you can't blame the Democrats on this one. Bush did the same thing, similar. We had the 2008 Gaza war, where numerous war crimes were taking place, and that happened under the Obama administration. Need I remind you what the United States did under the Trump administration by assassinating a general, Iran's Al-Quds general, Qasem Soleimani, who, by the way, was fighting against the Islamic State in Syria. As Israel escalates its attacks on Gaza, the State Department is discouraging diplomats working on Middle East issues from making public statements suggesting the United States wants to see less violence. I'll read that again. So this way you can get a clearer picture. As Israel escalates its attacks on Gaza, the State Department is discouraging diplomats working on Middle East issues from making public statements suggesting the United States wants to see less violence. according to internal emails viewed by Huffington Post. In messages circulated on Friday, State Department staff wrote that high-level officials do not want press materials to include three specific phrases: de-escalation, ceasefire, end to violence, bloodshed, and restoring calm. Ladies and gentlemen, for those who vote, when you wonder why I'm critical of voting, here is just one glaring example. The United States, strongest ally to them is Israel. Israel basically needs the United States because of its military to fight the wars that they facilitate and instigate. If we're ever going to get past this period of human history, it seems that we have to hit rock bottom. And I don't think we've hit rock bottom yet, because out of the ashes, the phoenix will rise. If it ever does, if we ever make it that far. Or do we even need to reach that approach? If we don't get these people out of office, if we don't change, I'm not talking about getting rid of the left and right. I'm talking about fundamentally, systematically removing the government and replacing it with a new one that actually doesn't cater to tyrants like Netanyahu, criminals like Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and other dictatorships and religious fundamentalists worldwide. We will never see absolute peace and hegemony anywhere in the world. The revelation provides a stunning signal about the Biden administration's reluctance to push for Israeli restraint as the close U.S. partners expand the offensive it launches after Hamas, which rules Gaza, attacked Israel communities on October 7th. The emails were sent hours after Israel told more than 1.1 million residents of northern Gaza that they should leave their homes and shelters ahead of an expected ground invasion of the region. In other words, what this could say, I'm not saying it will, but what this could say is that the U.S. knows what Israel is about to do, which is the complete slaughter of anybody in Gaza City left. Any Palestinian, man, woman, and child, that they are about to slaughter these people. In fact, Netanyahu earlier today announced they're sending more reinforcements to Gaza City. They're going to level the entire place. Just like they did with Khan Yunis and Ramal and other places. Gaza City being the biggest city, I think, in the Gaza Strip. By doing this, they've now relocated Palestinians to larger concentration of Palestinians in smaller enclaves. The U.S. knows this. That's why they don't talk about a ceasefire. There'll be no talks about peace. Let Israel do what it wants. If it's committing war crimes, we will ignore them. Thursday, United Nations said Israel has given Gaza a 24-hour deadline, 24 hours, to move 1 million people, to move to the south of the Strip, and warned that it would be impossible for such a movement to take place without devastating humanitarian consequences. Everybody around the world knows what's going on, but nobody has the guts to do anything about it. Nobody. Saudi Arabia is staying silent, predictably. So is Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. You think they're going to take the refugees? Nope, they don't care. They don't care about them. Asked about Israel's evacuation order on Friday, U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby declined to reject or endorse it, calling it a tall order. We're going to be careful not to get into armchair quarterbacking the tactics on the ground by the Israeli Defense Forces, Kirby said. What I can tell you is we understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to move civilians out of harm's way and giving them fair warning. Kirby, slave to Israel. When reached for comment on the directive, a State Department official said they would not comment on internal communications. U.S. officials have said they expect Israel to abide by the laws of war in its operation against Hamas. We're going to talk about that next. But they have avoided discussion of a ceasefire, even as aid groups and some analysts have suggested that may be essential to allow civilians to flee Gaza and allow vital supplies to enter the area after Israel cut off electricity and water that the Strip usually relies on. And what does this mean? With the escalation of violence against the Palestinians means that warnings are coming from Iran, Lebanon. Iran's foreign minister warns Israel from Beirut it could suffer a huge earthquake because Iran and Lebanon are the only ones who have the guts to fight back. Iran's foreign minister on Saturday called on Israel to stop its attacks on Gaza, warning that the war might expand to other parts of the Middle East if Hezbollah joins the battle, and that would make Israel suffer a huge earthquake. Hossein Amir Abdollahian told reporters in Beirut that Lebanon's Hezbollah group has taken all the scenarios of a war into consideration, and Israel should stop its attacks on Gaza as soon as possible. What this is telling Israel is that we are going to expedite the attacks on the Palestinians in the very hopes that Hezbollah enters the war. In other words, they're telling them, come on, come on. This is exactly what we want. We ultimately wanted a conflict with all the preconceived enemies to Israel. Hezbollah, Al-Qassam brigades, Al-Quds force in Iran. We want you all. And we're going to get the United States to help us. We already have warships in the Mediterranean. This is the war I told people 3 years ago was going to happen with Iran. Now, it hasn't happened. And hopefully it doesn't. But how can they restrain themselves when the world is silent on the war crimes and the massacre that is happening in Gaza? Now, I'm not using that term lightly. It's a massacre. Israel considers Hezbollah its most serious immediate threat, estimating it has some 150,000 rockets and missiles, including precision-guided missiles that can hit anywhere in Israel. The group, which has thousands of battle-hardened fighters who participated in Syria's 12-year conflict, also has different types of military drones. Now, already Israel is bombing the border of Lebanon. They've already killed, I think it's 3 Hezbollah fighters there. They have warned that if Hezbollah actually enters the war, they are going to attack Damascus and Syria. Why? Because Syria, out of the 3 countries of Iran and Lebanon, is the weakest. And it's also the connection between Lebanon and Hezbollah to Iran. It makes militarily sense. And this would expand on the war crimes that are happening. Now, The Economist wrote, is Israel acting within the laws of war in Gaza? This is something we need to talk about, right? So we go down, right? So more than 1,900 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza since October 7th, when Hamas terrorists murdered 1,300 people in southern Israel. Israeli jets and artillery have been pounding the coastal enclave. The scenes out of Gaza will be hard to stomach, warned a spokesman for the IDF on October 12th. Hamas, which has deliberately massacred civilians and whose founding charter commits it to the destruction of Israel, is undoubtedly guilty of war crimes. How far can Israel go in response? Well, if you go down here, right? This is the part I want to read you. Lawyers distinguish between temporary evacuation of civilians in war zones, which can be lawful, and permanent displacement, where the intent is to prevent them from returning, which is not. However, the International Committee of the Red Cross, a humanitarian group, says that the evacuation instructions combined with the siege are not compatible with international humanitarian law. I'm going to read to you the 4 directives under the International Criminal Courts, and you make the decision whether Israel is abiding by the International Criminal Courts or violating them. It is also not always safe to move within the bombardment continues. Video footage verified by the Washington Post showed a number of people, including several children, who had been killed, apparently by an Israeli strike while they were fleeing to the south on Friday. To people like Meghan McCain, George Santos, Tom Cotton, Ben Shapiro, and Dave Rubin, and all the conservative commentators still repeating the 40 beheaded babies by Hamas, which never took place. Well, at least we have evidence of Israeli military killing children by the hundreds. You're a hypocrite. Your hypocrisy knows no bounds. And I'm going to call you out on it. And none of you have the moral fortitude to challenge me, or anybody else for that matter, regarding this issue of war crimes, of your hypocrisy that, oh, look, Hamas and Palestinians are animals because they kill children. Here you have it. Israeli military killing children. Not the first time. We'll talk about that in a minute. And for those who say Hamas used civilians as shields, human shields, we're going to talk about that too. Question of evacuation is tangled up with the specific conditions of Gaza, where Hamas is deeply intermingled with the civilian population. IHL, which governs the conduct of armies once they are waging a war, demands that soldiers distinguish between combatants and military objects on one hand, and civilian objects on the other. Now, someone had an argument with me about what is Israel to do regarding Hamas. And I said that Israel needs to go to neighborhood by neighborhood and disseminate who is Hamas and who is not. And that person said that would take, it would be long and impossible to do almost. I don't know. We've never done it before, though Israel's never done it before. So it can't be impossible if it's never been done before. But also, too, this is saving the massacre of everybody involved. Isn't the health and welfare of civilians at the utmost importance of any government, including the most moral army on earth, supposedly? Well, not anymore. This person had no issue with carpet bombing entire neighborhoods and destroying it because it gets rid of the problem. Well, actually, it doesn't. And this person I'm talking to, I respect very deeply. Still do. Nevertheless, what is happening here are war crimes. The hypocrisy of being outraged at the crimes of Hamas when you're conducting those crimes tenfold. If you care about the welfare and safety of civilians, you wouldn't bombard entire neighborhoods and destroy convoys you told them to leave out of the areas you're bombing. You've lost any credibility when it comes to being a moral army. You lost any credibility when it comes to being genuine in your concern for the Palestinians, because you're not. You're not. What you want is total victory over a very battered and beaten people, and you want them to be liquidated. That's not me saying it. That is the Israeli cabinet under Netanyahu saying it. Watch my previous video. They're saying it out loud. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, the national security director, Ben Gvir. Listen to them. They're telling you that we'll just kill thousands of Palestinians. And the reason why they're more bold and that they could publicly declare these thoughts that would reside in one's head is because they know nobody, not the United States, not Germany, not France or Canada, not England, not the Netherlands, not Spain, not Saudi Arabia, not the Gulf. Nobody's going to say, well, you shouldn't have said that, because all these countries' governments are sold out. Question is why? Israel's targeting is broadly within the mainstream of contemporary state practice and in line with American doctrine, argued Michael Schmidt of the University of Reading and Lieutenant Colonel John Merriam, a U.S. Army judge advocate, in papers published after they visited the IDF's headquarters and studied its procedures shortly after Operation Protective Edge, Israel's 50-day war on Hamas. But the same legal principles, even interpreted in broadly the same way, can result in different and sometimes jarring outcomes because of local circumstances. Now, back in 2021, the International Criminal Court opens war crimes investigation in West Bank and Gaza for those who say, well, Israel doesn't commit war crimes. Fatou Bensouda said the probe would cover events in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip since June of 2014. That's an 8-year report. Last month, the Hague-based court ruled that it would exercise its criminal jurisdiction over the territories. Israel rejected Ms. Bensouda's decision, while Palestinian officials praised it. The ICC has the authority to prosecute those accused of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and on the territory of state parties to the Rome Statute, its founding treaty. Now, how does the court work? Well, like I said in previous videos, there are 4 main crimes that are prosecuted by the which are called the Rome Statutes, based on the International Criminal Courts community. Now, the court's founding treaty, called the Rome Statute, grants the International Criminal Courts, the ICC, jurisdiction over 4 main crimes. Now I'm going to read the definition of all 4 main crimes, so bear with me, because they're important. First, the crime of genocide is characterized by the specific intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group by killing its members or by other means, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in part or in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Based on this definition, is Israel military and its government guilty of genocide? Second, the ICC can prosecute crimes against humanity, which are serious violations committed as part of a large-scale attack against any civilian population. The 15 forms of crimes against humanity listed in the Rome Statute include offenses such as murder, rape, imprisonment, enforced disappearances, enslavement, particularly of women and children, sexual slavery, torture, apartheid, and deportation. Based on this definition, is the Israeli government and its military guilty of crimes against humanity? Third, war crimes, which are grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions in the context of armed conflict and include, for instance, the use of child soldiers, the killing or torture of persons such as civilians or prisoners of war, intentionally directing attacks against hospitals, historic monuments, or buildings dedicated to religion, education, art, science, or charitable purposes. Is the Israeli government and its military guilty of crimes against crimes of aggression? War crimes, war crimes. Finally, the fourth crime falling within the ICC jurisdiction is the crime of aggression. It is the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, integrity, or independence of another state. The definition of this crime was adopted through amending the Rome Statute at the first review conference of the statute in Kampala, Uganda in 2010. On December 15, 2017, the Assembly of States Parties adopted by consensus a resolution on the activation of the jurisdiction of the Court of the Crime of Aggression on July 17, 2018. Is the Israeli military and government guilty of the crime of aggression as outlined by the International Criminal Courts? And it tells you, and I'll post this in the description about how investigations and cases are investigated by the international. It's a very good and invaluable website from the International Criminal Courts. Now, we all know Hamas has committed grave war crimes here. Genocide, crimes of aggression, crimes against humanity. But at the same time, has the Israeli military and its government committed the abuses of any of those four statutes? Now, we've heard time and time again how Hamas uses regular people as human shields. I hear this from conservative commentators all the time, especially Ben Shapiro. He loves to use Hamas uses human shields, right? All the time. But you never hear how the IDF uses Palestinian children as human shields. Oh, don't take me saying this on face value. This was a BBC report in March of 2009. Israeli army used human shields. United Nations investigators have accused the Israeli army of using an 11-year-old boy as a human shield during its recent Gaza offensive. Their report says troops ordered the boy to walk in front of them for several hours under fire, entering buildings and opening suspect packages. The United Nations team responsible for protection of children in war zones says it found hundreds of similar violations. Hundreds of similar violations. And of course, Israel has denied the charges, saying morals are paramount in its army. Of course, right? Israel's ambassador to the UN criticized the report as unable or perhaps unwilling to address attacks against its civilians by Palestinian militants. Lead investigator in that report, Sri Lankan lawyer Radhika Kurmaswamy, said the incident with the boy in the Gaza neighborhood of the Tel El Hawa on January 15 was a violation of Israeli and international law. He's lying? No, he's not. It's not the first time the use of human shields by the Israeli military. In 2005, the Israeli military court convicted 2 Israeli soldiers of using human shields, by the way, which is outlawed by Israel's own Supreme Court, which there's a law on this. The Israeli Supreme Court in 2005 passed a law not for the military to use human shields. Of course, the reports of white phosphorus in Gaza, or the dense inert metal explosives used to minimize collateral damage, in which Human Rights Watch have condemned the Israeli military of using in Gaza. Accusation of misconduct by Israeli soldiers in incidents like the 2014 Gaza war, the Second Intifada, and of course, currently what's happening now. And, you know, we can all armchair quarterback and basically say, look at Hamas. They're evil. They're beheading babies. They're bombing civilians. They're kidnapping women and raping them. How horrible they are. Israel needs to do something. When Israel does something, even though some of those reports were false and unfounded, Israel reacts in the very same manner, and now even worse than what Hamas has done, by completely razing entire neighborhoods straight down to its foundations, by bombing convoys in which they told Palestinians to leave, killing children and women, shooting children by using Israeli snipers on rooftops, having the Netanyahu cabinet come right out in the open and make their thoughts known to the world that Palestinians need to be killed in the thousands, and they don't care about the repercussions. What's the difference between the Israeli IDF and Hamas currently? And the question becomes, is the response proportionate to the action? The statistics currently say no. Friedrich Nietzsche once said that if you look into the abyss long enough, you'll see the abyss stare back at you. The conservatives who are admonishing the Democrats and the left for the war in Ukraine and the war crimes happening in Ukraine suddenly have a different view and a different opinion and a different moral view regarding what is happening in Gaza, which only shows the hypocrisy of the left and the right. But when you look at it from a more broader perspective outside of those rose-colored glasses, and you don't see it as a left and right perspective, and you don't see the world as black and white, as Christian, Jew, Gentile, or Muslim, well, you don't see it through a religious lens. We don't see it as a racial lens or a sexist lens or a political lens. When you realize that what is happening is that there is a war of good and evil, of rich and poor, the oldest war in human existence. The term of jihad, that the conservatives say is about a war against the Gentiles and the non-believers or the kafir. But the jihad meaning the war against the spiritual sense, the jihad, the definition of war between good and evil that Christ talks about in the Bible. The spiritual warfare within yourself for those who believe in God. I'm atheist. The war within yourself. And when you transform yourself, you could transform the world. But right now, the way we're fighting this war in particular only means that we have not changed us within ourselves yet. For those who have, and those who have basically evolved past the isms and the constructs made that to divide you and create divisions upon your fellow man, you'll realize that the only thing that matters is yourselves. And if we're going to change the world, we need more people to realize that they're not defined within those isms, within those ideologies, within those constructs, and that they're defined by the unity of themselves. And that's the only way we're going to defeat the evil of the US government, the Israeli government, the Saudi government, and every other government on the face of the earth, because they only serve themselves and they don't speak for the rest of us. As always, I will report the news without bias and without prejudice and keep you informed whenever I can with the latest updates. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Good night.